All right, guys. So Theo Vaughn, comedian and podcaster, recently had on Dr. Gabor Mate, who is a physician as well as an expert in childhood trauma. And Theo actually broke down during a part of this conversation when Dr. Mate was getting into the widespread trauma that countless thousands of Palestinian children in Gaza have been subjected to over the last year of genocide. So we're going to go ahead and watch this clip, and then I got a bunch of other updates that I wanted to get to with you guys as well. So let's go ahead and jump into this here.
Things as the children in Gaza are experiencing right now with the daily bombings and all this kind of stuff. What can they think? That there's something wrong with me.
Oh, imagine some kid over there in Gaza looking up and there's a bomb, they think, man, I'm so horrible, I deserve to be bombed.
Well, you know what? There was a study done of Gazan children.
Man, that's crazy. I hadn't thought about that. Like, really look, imagine that, though.
There was a study done of children in Palestine 21 years ago. And 95%, this is long before the current horrors, long before October the 7th, long before the aftermath of October the 7th. 5% of those kids showed traumatic symptoms. High percentage wet their beds, like you and I did. They expressed aggression towards their parents. They had panic attacks, anxiety, fears. Can you imagine what's going to happen to that generation
years from now?
Years from now. I mean, it just breaks my heart every day when I think about it. And I know a lot of my fellow Jews don't agree with me, but as a Jewish person, I'm not the only one who feels that way. It especially breaks my heart.
Yeah.
You know?
When you put it in that sense, that a kid, imagine a kid like, because what are they going to think? They don't know. They just think, man, something's so wrong with me. I deserve to be killed.
Yeah.
Or something. I don't know. Yeah.
It depends if the adults are able to hold them and keep them feeling loved. But 19,000 kids have been orphaned. And when I say orphaned, I don't mean just that their parents have died. Their extended families have been wiped out. Yeah. What's going to be the future of those kids? And anyway, it's just a terrible.
No, it's heartbreaking. I mean, it feels like a genocide is going on over there and you don't know what to do, it's like, I mean, you can pray, you can speak up about it. And I know that there's like a more political aspects of it. And we've had different people come on to talk about Israel and Palestine on here. And it was very knowledgeable for a lot of our listeners because you hear about it a lot, but you don't know the history and everything. But
well, I've been there. I went there 2.5 years ago to work with Palestinian women tortured in Israeli jails.
Wow.
And they had post-traumatic stress disorder. I've seen it with my own eyes.
So first off, credit to Theo for having Dr. Mate on. And it is I think it's important to point out that when you have somewhat of a normie podcast of this size, like Theo's is, and there are other ones that this applies to as well, but when they are able to introduce these kinds of topics in a way that I think is understandable to a broader audience that isn't necessarily tapped in with politics or isn't tapped in with the Middle East or isn't tapped in with the history of Israel and Gaza, like that makes the importance of these kinds of conversations, that much more heightened. So credit to him for having this guest on. And obviously, I mean, he was deeply impacted by this conversation as well. I mean, literally being moved to tears. Some of the statistics that Dr. Mate brings up there are like hard to wrap your mind around. I mean, over 2 decades ago, 95% of the children in Gaza, and keep in mind, roughly half the population in Gaza are children. 95% of the children in Gaza over 2 decades ago had significant trauma. Now, look at what's happened over the last year, where the entirety of the population has been displaced. As he points out there, over 19,000 children have been orphaned, not just their parents dying, but also, in many circumstances, entire bloodlines, entire families being wiped off the face of the map. I mean, the whole population displaced, vast majority of the civilian infrastructure, people's homes, hospitals, schools, everything being utterly destroyed within a year's time. Think about the lifelong trauma that is associated with that. Not to mention the physical injuries as well. I mean, we've covered previous stories before of how many children have lost limbs inside of Gaza. This is stuff that cannot be repaired, right? This is the kind of widespread, society-wide psychological and physical trauma that there really is no coming back from. And it's unfortunate, but that's what happens to children when they're subjected to these kinds of scenarios. Now, the other point that I think could be made about that is not only obviously the direct impact psychologically, physically that this has had on the children of Gaza, but also, from a political standpoint, if Israel's goal, as they said from the beginning, was to essentially eliminate militant Palestinian resistance forces. In the case of Gaza, we're talking about mostly Hamas, but also, the PIJ, other groups as well. If that's the stated goal, what do you think what Israel has done in Gaza over the last year is going to do towards that goal? In other words, do you think it's more or less likely to force people into a situation where militant resistance is the only pathway forward that they can conceive of when you put them into this kind of situation? I mean, this is how something like October 7th happens in the first place. It's blowback, right? You simply cannot keep people under occupation, under apartheid, under an ongoing ethnic cleansing, and expect that nothing is ever going to blow back out of that. Of course it will. And what's happened over the last year has made that, I think, infinitely worse. Infinitely worse. Now, some other updates that I wanted to get to here on the same front. Let's go ahead and jump into this. So, CNN recently put out what I think is one of the most, given the context of all of this, deranged articles that I've ever read in my entire life. So their headline here is, he got out of Gaza, but Gaza did not get out of him. Israeli soldiers returning from war struggle with trauma and suicide. So they focus in here on this guy, Eliran Mizrahi, and he took his own life. As they point out here, they say it was due to some of the trauma that he suffered while he was fighting inside of Gaza. Now, some specific aspects of this article that I wanted to highlight for you guys. The mental health toll. They say that Mizrahi deployed to Gaza on October 8th last year and was tasked with driving a D9 bulldozer, a 62-ton armored vehicle that can withstand bullets and explosives. He was a civilian for most of his life, working as a manager at an Israeli construction company, and after witnessing the massacres committed by Hamas on October 7th, he felt the need to fight. The reservist spent 186 days in the enclave until he sustained injuries to his knee following an RPG strike on his vehicle. He was pulled out for treatment and in April was diagnosed with PTSD, receiving weekly talk therapy. They say his treatment did not help. Now, here's where we get to, I think, the deranged aspect of this article. They say this other guy who was his partner in this bulldozer that this Mizrahi was, part of driving and operating inside of Gaza, his name is Zakin, his co-driver of the bulldozer, provided further insight into their experience in Gaza. He says, quote, "We saw very, very difficult things that are difficult to accept. The former soldier has spoken publicly about the psychological trauma endured by Israeli troops in Gaza. In a testimony to the Knesset, Israel's parliament, in June, Zakin said that on many occasions, soldiers had to, quote, run over terrorists, dead and alive, in the hundreds. He went on to say, everything squirts out. They then say that he has claimed that he can no longer eat meat, as it reminds him of the gruesome scenes that he witnessed from his bulldozer in Gaza and struggles to sleep at night, and the sound of explosions ring in his head. He says, quote, when you see a lot of meat outside and blood, both ours and theirs, meaning Hamas, then it really affects when you eat. He's referring to the bodies there as meat. They say, so there is no such thing as citizens, he continued. Referring to the ability of Hamas fighters to blend in with civilians, he says this is terrorism. When soldiers do encounter civilians, however, many face a moral dilemma, according to the IDF medic, who spoke to CNN anonymously. This medic said there was a very strong collective attitude of distrust amongst Israeli soldiers toward the Palestinians in Gaza, especially at the outset of the war. He says there was a notion in Gaza that Gazans, including civilians, quote, are bad, that they support Hamas, they help Hamas, and they're hiding ammunition. So here we have CNN doing a profile on Israeli soldiers who say that they have been traumatized, who have PTSD, from committing war crimes inside of Gaza. Let's make something clear here, guys. When this soldier describes how they used a bulldozer to run over hundreds of Hamas terrorists. These are not Hamas militants that he's describing here. It is not possible that there were enough Hamas militants. I mean, logistically, this is impossible. That there were enough Hamas militants contained within the vicinity of a bulldozer for him to run over dead and alive. Hundreds. What he's likely describing here, as he continued, down in this article, how there's this distrust of Palestinian civilians and how, there is no distinguishing between civilians and Hamas to them. What he's describing here is running over, in all likelihood, a vast majority of civilians, right? Men, children, whatever the case may be. This is not something that is, the first kind of testimony or video that we've gotten similar to this. There have been other instances that I've seen floating around out of Gaza of the aftermath of what it looks like when a child is run over by a bulldozer inside of Gaza. This is also, by the way, the same way that the American Rachel Corrie was killed by the IDF years and years and years ago. So when I bring up this article, it's not to just make fun of these soldiers, whatever, for having PTSD or something. It's that to do this kind of a piece in the context of a genocide, I mean, you're talking about IDF soldiers, in many instances, who have chosen to go and participate in a genocide. People who are responsible for the killing of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of civilians, along with traumatizing the entire population there. The entire population of Gaza has been displaced. They've attacked schools, mosques, churches, hospitals, refugee camps, UN centers, journalists, aid workers, farmland, water infrastructure. To do a piece like this, trying to sympathize with these IDF war criminals and ignoring the suffering of the people who they are killing, is absolutely unhinged to me. In a vast majority of these circumstances, these are not victims, right? They almost describe them as if they are like witnesses to these atrocities, passive witnesses. And they're not. They're not victims of anything. They're describing how they ran over hundreds of people with a fucking bulldozer. You're not a victim, you're a war criminal. In all likelihood, many of these people should just be put on trial for their crimes. But here's CNN, humanizing IDF war criminals more so than they humanize Palestinian civilians who are being massacred in front of the entire world. I mean, even in this article here, they show some of the pictures out here. This is what Gaza looks like, guys. This is not a war of self-defense. This is not what it looks like to fight Hamas militants. Look at this. It is the complete obliteration of an entire society. That's what this looks like. Now, more specifics on the guy who was featured in that CNN article. Here we have as posted by Mohammed. The killer, who CNN thinks might be upsetting to its readers, his suicide that might be upsetting to its readers, was on Israeli TV. This was just a couple months ago, guys, with his co-driver, bragging about destroying thousands of Palestinian homes by themselves. Now, I was trying to fact check this and to make sure that this is the same guy. This is Mizrahi, who is featured in this article up here at the top. You can see his very distinct glasses as well as his very distinct facial hair here with the black mustache and beard with some white tinges to it. That looks like the same exact guy to me. Here he is, just a few months ago, going on Israeli Channel 13, bragging about how him and his bulldozer co-driver destroyed thousands of Palestinian civilian homes.
הרעש הזה בסוף תסביר? געגועים. די געגועים, די כבר עם זה. מה זה הרעש בסוף?
מטען שעלינו עליו באמצע סרטון שעשינו, עוד אחד מההפתעות שעשו לנו שם.
כמה בתים אתם הורסים? כתבתם איפשהו 1,500.
הגענו ל-5,000.
עדכני יותר, כן.
5,000?
כן, מוגש. צמא 271, מוכח לפי הכל.
לא. כל הצוות?
כל הפלוגה
שלנו.
אתם שניכם?
אנחנו הפסקנו לספור.
5,000 בתים.
של מחבלים, כמובן, כן.
איך אתה יודע שזה של מחבלים?
היה לנו הרבה
אין בית שאתה לא בא ואין לך בכל בית איזה הפתעה שמחכה לך. אין דבר כזה, בית שהגעת אליו ואין בו כלום. אין דבר כזה. אתה הולך ליד גני ילדים, אתה רואה משגרים, אתה הולך למסגדים, אתה רואה משגרים, אתה בבתי ספר, התפוצץ עליך מטענים, אין מקום שאין בו איזה משהו הפתעה.
ואתה מרגיש...
So there you have the same guy who looks like featured in that CNN article, bragging about how they destroyed thousands of Palestinian homes, saying essentially in their view, there is no such thing as a non-combatant home. Every home, every school, every kindergarten, in his own words, are indistinguishable from Hamas militant infrastructure. Now, I also wanted to show you guys this. I referenced it in my video yesterday, but Israel really is rolling out what I think could accurately be called the Gaza Doctrine now in Lebanon. Now, obviously, the Dahiyya Doctrine comes out of Lebanon. We talked about that before. But the reason I call it the Gaza Doctrine is because I think that it's essentially the Dahiyya Doctrine on steroids, of intentionally inflicting widespread damage and destruction on civilian infrastructure as a form of collective punishment to try to put pressure on the civilian population there. So this is what we're seeing in Lebanon. They've posted, videos and graphics. They claim that the IDF has revealed that Hezbollah has constructed a massive bunker underneath Beirut hospital where the group is currently hoarding cash. They're literally copying and pasting the exact same strategy that they used inside of Gaza to justify the obliteration of the entire healthcare system there. This is the same exact kind of graphic that they used for Al-Shifa Hospital inside of Gaza. Remember, they had this sprawling graphic of a underground compound with explosives and weapons and, meeting centers and everything you could imagine. And they never provided any actual evidence that this existed. They went on to use this 3D rendering as a justification to obliterate Al-Shifa Hospital along with the entirety of the surrounding neighborhoods of Al-Shifa. I mean, they went so far as to dig up the roads surrounding the hospital, right? And they are now using the exact same strategy inside of Lebanon. I mean, they're not even trying to be creative with their propaganda. They're not even trying to be creative with their justifications for the unjustifiable. They're just repeating the same playbook because they know they can get away with it. Because they know that the United States is not going to use the leverage that we have over them in order to force them to comply with international law and to stop attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure. They know that they have a shield from the United States. And so they can get away with shit like this. I mean, it's the same exact shit that we have seen for a year now inside of Gaza. Now, we had a follow-up on this because, in Gaza, there are essentially no journalists who are allowed to operate there. Unless, they are Palestinian journalists on the ground who have been killed by the dozens, but there are no foreign journalists who are allowed to go into Gaza unless they have an IDF escort. Now, in Lebanon, as of right now at least, it's a little bit more difficult for Israel to restrain journalists from trying to fact-check them on some of their claims. So here we have Sky News doing exactly that, fact-checking their claims that there was some sprawling, secret Hezbollah money stash in this hospital. Let's watch this.
This is the Al-Sahal hospital on the outskirts of Dahiyya. Dahiyya, of course, is a stronghold of Hezbollah. Now, we're in the basement. This is, it's alleged by the Israelis that this hospital is being used by Hezbollah as a way of storing gold and cash. Now, we've been invited in here. This tour has been in no way exhaustive. You can see there are lots of other press here as well. But we haven't been controlled in terms of what we can film or where we can point our camera. We've been allowed to open doors, move around. Now, there may be other areas of the hospital that we've not been taken to, but for all, this looks like a hospital. This is one of the operating theatres here. We can talk to one of the doctors. This is Dr. Omar, who is an emergency doctor.
Yes, here at Sahel Hospital.
So Israel says that this place is being used by Hezbollah for gold and cash.
Yeah.
What's your answer to that?
Our answer to this is that these allegations are wholly unbased, and this is a hospital where people come to get treated.
Well, no shit. I mean, no shit. Of course that's what it is. Now, just as a reminder, I've covered videos before, testimonies from dozens of American doctors, Western doctors, who have gone to Gaza and have operated within their hospital system as well. And repeatedly what we hear from them is that not a single one, at least from what I've seen, has said that they've seen any, at all, Hamas militant infrastructure or Hamas militants themselves operating from within the Gaza healthcare system. So, these are not Palestinians who would have some sort of a bias or whatever the case may be. These are American doctors who are testifying, yes, we operated in all sorts of different healthcare facilities throughout Gaza. We never once saw any sort of, militant infrastructure inside of these hospitals. So, I mean, the idea that Israel can just, without providing any real substantive evidence, nothing that's verifiable, and claim that these hospitals are like secret terrorist bunkers or something, and then destroy them, is absolutely unhinged. These are war crimes when you attack hospitals. The standards for attacking a hospital are extremely stringent under international law. There has to be an active military threat from these locations in order to justify attacking them. And even then, you still have to take in the proportionality assessment of what is going to be the potential military benefit versus what is going to be the cost to civilians, right? These are rules. These are standards that Israel doesn't even pretend to follow. They don't even pretend to follow it. Now, this was just one guy doing a short little tour here of the hospital. I've seen 3, 4, 5 other ones from other journalists who have also been inside this hospital saying the same thing over and over and over again. But be prepared, because the IDF is seemingly, 100% going to attack this hospital now. Now, we also have, at the same time, the IDF attacking a different hospital inside of Beirut. This is the Rafik Hariri Hospital. And these are some of the images. They say phones are still ringing under the rubble. An Israeli airstrike there on Monday night flattened 4 buildings. 13 people, including a child, were killed and 57 others were wounded. They say there was no evacuation warning. And these are some of the images of the aftermath, people desperately trying to plow through the rubble to see if they can save any sort of survivors. And we have here from Owen Jones, pointing out the obvious, saying, so that's it. Right? The West has completely normalized the destruction of hospitals and the killing of medical personnel and patients. How can the West claim moral legitimacy on anything ever again? Its moral claims are buried under this rubble, and he is 100% correct on that. Now, at the same time, we have continued attacks on Gaza's medical system. Here we have the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza, where there is currently a massive ethnic cleansing underway in the north. They say it was set ablaze and destroyed by the Israeli military, and also pointing out that for 17 days now, and this was posted yesterday, northern Gaza has been besieged and subject to a focused and brutal campaign of ethnic cleansing, and this is the image of the attack. Now, we also have here, at the same time, continued attacks, not just on the healthcare system, but also on the United Nations directly. Here from the Financial Times, they say that Israel's military has forcibly entered a clearly marked UN base and is suspected of using the incendiary chemical white phosphorus, close enough to injure 15 peacekeepers. They are striking UN bases, United Nations bases, with white phosphorus. So again, the concept of international law is something that simply does not exist when it comes to Israel. Now, this is just one attack. There have been other attacks, other threats that have been levied against the United Nations, against UN peacekeepers in Lebanon, and of course, we don't even need to get into or to remind ourselves of the widespread attacks, historically significant attacks against the United Nations in Gaza as well, and the continued allegations from Israel that UN organizations like UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, are essentially the same as Hamas to them. Now, we also have further pictures here coming out from Israeli soldiers. These are from Jabalia in the refugee camp in North Gaza. They say here from Yunus Tawawi that they have obtained these pictures through Israeli soldiers on their private social media accounts. So once again, Israeli soldiers proudly posting their war crimes. Here we have one who looks to be sitting maybe on top of a tank here, or some sort of a vehicle with a gunner on top, a building burning in the background. Just absolutely apocalyptic images here. Again, proudly posting this with the caption, "I guess you wonder where I've been," from this Israeli soldier. More posting here with burning buildings widespread in the background. There's nothing left. There is nothing left in Gaza. It's been entirely destroyed. This is what Gaza looks like now. I don't know if people who are still justifying what Israel is doing are just somehow, and maybe they're intentionally avoiding images like this, or they're just somehow unaware of it, or maybe they see things like this and they still think it's justified. But I just don't understand how you can see the amount of destruction of civilian infrastructure in Gaza and say, yeah, that looks like a targeted hunt for Hamas. In what fucking world? This is not a war. This is not what war looks like, typically. This is a genocide. That's what this is. Now, further emphasizing that point here, from Mohammed Safa, this is not a detainment camp in World War II, nor a prison in the Holocaust. This is Gaza in 2024, a chilling reminder that history repeats itself. And these are some of the images, I believe, out of North Gaza, where, again, the IDF is engaging in a massive ethnic cleansing of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who have been stuck there, as if there is anywhere safe for these people to go after leaving northern Gaza. The threat from Israel for weeks now has essentially been leave the entirety of North Gaza, which was, before October 7th, the main population center, leave this entire place, or if you stay, you will be targeted and killed, as well as starved out. Now, we also have this here, posted by Barak Ravid of Axios, the demands that Israel has given for ending its war in Lebanon. I want to focus on one point here. Towards the end, the official, this Israeli official who was in contact with the U.S., said that Israel is demanding that its Air Force have freedom of operation in Lebanese airspace. So, in other words, right, Israel is saying, in order for us to end our invasion and destruction of Lebanon, Lebanon, as a sovereign country, has to give up its sovereignty. You have to agree to allow a foreign military, the IDF, to operate freely in your airspace, meaning the Israeli Air Force can bomb you whenever, however they want. That's what their core demand is here. So you have that aspect in terms of the lack of movement towards any real off-ramp here. Same time, it's posted here by Jeremy Scahill, saying that Antony Blinken has said that he is in the Middle East to work on ending the Gaza war. A senior Hamas official tells me that as of now, Hamas has not been approached about resuming ceasefire talks. So, as the U.S. is continuing to say Hamas is not interested in negotiating for some sort of an end, at the same time as they're claiming that, Hamas is saying they're not even approaching us about having a conversation about ceasefire talks. And of course, we know from the beginning of this, Benjamin Netanyahu could have negotiated an end. He could have negotiated, a return of all of the hostages that were being held in Gaza days after October 7th. He refused to then, he continued to refuse to, and still refuses to now. Benjamin Netanyahu is the primary blockade to any sort of an end to the genocide in Gaza, to, the ongoing ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, to the invasion of Lebanon, to the escalation with Iran. He's been the primary blockade. Not to say that, the so-called opposition leaders in Israel are, so much better than him or anything, but he has been the blockade to bringing about an end to this. And in the exact same, vein, so has Joe Biden, right? Because Joe Biden could have decided to end this whenever he wanted. It wouldn't take that much. You just have to be willing to use the leverage that you have over Israel and stop sending them weapons, stop funding them, stop giving them diplomatic cover on the world stage. That's all that it would take from Joe Biden. As previous U.S. presidents have demonstrated, it could even be as simple as a phone call to Israel. Now, we also have this here, making the goals for what Israel is trying to do inside of Gaza explicitly clear. In this case, we have Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister in Israel. I also covered a few days ago the minister of national security in Israel, Itamar Ben-Gvir, saying basically the exact same thing. So here from Prem, after the U.S. sent a letter asking Israel to follow international law, that's great, right? We're not going to use the leverage that we have over them. We're not going to cut off or restrict arms sales, but we're going to send them a nicely worded letter to please stop committing war crimes with the weapons we're giving you, right? So after they sent this letter, and after killing Yahya Sinwar, top Israeli minister Bezalel Smotrich says that the IDF will control Gaza for years. For years. Does this sound like they are interested in peace? He also says that he's going to a conference dedicated towards a Zionist pioneer settlement in Gaza. A settlement in Gaza. You don't openly discuss how you want to settle a place with your own people after ethnically cleansing another group of people if you're doing a targeted war against a militant group. Again, this is what a genocide looks like. This is what an ethnic cleansing looks like. And this is what a settler colonial project coming to its final fruition after decades and decades and decades looks like. That's what this is. And they openly say this. I mean, these kinds of statements are never discussed in U.S. media. That's one of the most frustrating aspects of how they talk about all of these things, is that they never even bring up these statements from Israeli officials. These are not random Israelis, thinking about in their ideal world what they would want to do with Gaza. This is the finance minister of Israel, the minister of national security, Itamar Ben-Gvir. These are not nobodies. These are high-ranking officials in the Benjamin Netanyahu coalition, and they're attending conferences on settling Gaza. The goals of what Israel is trying to do there are not difficult to figure out. They openly say it. They proudly say it. Now, tomorrow I'll have more videos covering more of the political angle of some of this, as well as other updates that I'm going to have for you guys. But, man, it's nice to have, again, going back towards the beginning of this video, guys like Theo Vaughn, I guess, having, conversations on more normie podcasts about what's going on. But it is just incredibly bleak. It's incredibly bleak. Every single day, it gets worse. Every single day, you see more bodies being pulled from the rubble. Every day, it seems like we're getting farther and farther from any sort of an off-ramp or, approaching a ceasefire. And every single day, our government continues to entrench ourselves in complicity in one of the most egregious crimes in modern history.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying